The Jack Miller Center, among other things, exists to promote good conversation and then shamelessly interrupt it. So I apologize. It's great to hear a room full of such vibrant conversation, but we have to get on with the latest part of our evening's entertainment. But first, I'd like to introduce Jack Miller, who in turn is going to introduce our speaker tonight, John Agresto. So Jack's life, in many ways, represents the American ideal. The belief that hard work, or sweat equity, as Jack has called it many times, determination, intelligence, a passion for what you do can lead to success. And Jack's personal journey is precisely the sort of narrative that is so often missing when American history is taught on campus. Jack came from a very modest background. He grew up in a working class neighborhood on Chicago's North Side. He started his office supply business in 1956, and his first office was in the back of his, I believe it was his uncle's. Was it your uncle? Dad. His dad's live poultry shop with a desk, a chair, and 2 phones. So from these humble beginnings, Jack and his brother Harvey built the Quill Corporation, which became one of the country's first mail-order businesses and one of its largest office supply companies. But one of the striking things about Jack is the deep sense of gratitude that has accompanied his success and his desire to give back to the country that made his success possible and to ensure that future generations can enjoy that success as well. And the best way to do this, Jack believes, is the education of the young, hence his decision to found the Jack Miller Center. So you've all received a copy of Jack's latest book, Born Free. Please take a look at it. It tells both Jack's personal story and it gives a history of the founding and progress of the Jack Miller Center. So please join me in welcoming Jack Miller.
Mike, thank you for those nice words. I appreciate the good things you said about me because my daughters are here and I'm glad to hear that they heard it. And of course, it never hurts to repeat them to Goldie either. So good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for being here and for being at the conference there, the panel. I thought it was very interesting and I enjoyed it. I hope you did too. It's going to be my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, John Agresto. But before I do, I want to take a few minutes to tell you what I believe the real crisis in our country is today and what we at the Jack Miller Center are doing about it. The real crisis is that our kids are growing up with either no view or a distorted view, which is even worse, of what our wonderful country is about, what our history has been as we continuously work toward that ideal and our Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal and they are endowed by their Creator with the inalienable right to life, liberty, their liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, their pursuit of happiness. At best, if they're getting any history in high school or even earlier, it is through the eyes of slavery. Today, even our great founders, Washington, Jefferson, Madison, and many more, are being taught from a single viewpoint as slave owners. All that's good about America, all that has made it, as Bill McClay put it in his wonderful new book, Land of Hope, all that's great about it, it brings millions and millions of people who flock here and want to be here. And so they're not being taught that. And we just sat back and complained about it and let it happen until about 15 years ago when we at the Miller Center decided to do something about it. The results today you saw in the packet that you received. 305, the number of campuses across the country where we have accredited classes and other programs. 973, the number of professors in our network who are teaching those classes and holding those programs. 22,947, the number of courses that have been taught since we began. And this year, it'll be 1,050,000, the number of students who have taken and are taking those classes and attending those programs. No longer are we sitting back and letting those malcontents tell their false story of America. And those numbers are just the beginning. With your help, and with the help of donors around the country, the numbers can become much larger. In addition, 3 years ago in Chicago, we started a program to teach high school civics teachers how to teach the founding principles. We have programs for them, classes for them, where they read the original documents. They read the Declaration, they read the Constitution, they read all of the original documents, the Federalist Papers, the Anti-Federalist Papers, and they begin to learn how to teach this to their students. As the panel made clear today, and I thought the panel was wonderful, as they made clear today, you cannot teach patriotism, but you can teach freedom. And if you teach freedom in this country, you'll get to patriotism. You'll get to the love of this country. And there's more in the pipeline as we work to recapture the teaching of the real story about America and teach it to all of our young people so that they can grow up to be proud, patriotic citizens of this wonderful country of ours. When I started writing this speech, I thought I was taking a few minutes from my introduction of John to get across a message that I feel deeply about. But then as I wrote it, I realized that what I had to say was a perfect introduction for John. In his book, Rediscovering America, John lays it all out in strong, powerful language. The beauty of America, the goodness and the strength of the American experiment. Because he has been on the board of directors of the Jack Miller Center for the past 3 years, I've gotten to know John fairly well, but it wasn't until I recently read his book that I really understood his deep feelings for our country, his passion for it, nor did I appreciate the depth and width of his experience. John is an author, a lecturer, and a university administrator. He has not only written a number of books, but also has been published in the areas of politics, religion, literature, and history and education. He's been in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the New York Times, Commentary Magazine, and the Chronicle of Higher Education. He's held a number of positions in academia and was head of one of the greatest liberal arts colleges in the country, St. John's, and a founding member of the American University of Iraq in Suleimania? Oh, okay, Suleimania. I could go on, but I think you get the picture. John is a well-educated, patriotic American, someone who wants to pass that on to future generations. Personally, I look forward to his remarks this evening, and I hope he will be as open and frank as he was in his book, Rediscovering America, a book that all of you should read. So with that, John.
Thank you, Mike. Mike Andrews. Thank you, Jack. He's right. You should all read my book, Rediscovering America, but you can't. I gave away the last copy to John Lillard, and the book was such a poor seller that the publisher has gone out of business. So look on the used book market, will you please, and see if you could find it again. Or if you know a publisher who wants to reprint it, all the rights came back to me after the company went out of business. And Jack, you're absolutely right. Your life has been, through hard work, almost a charmed life. But you didn't give Goldie enough credit. I'm sorry. The thing he did well was he married the best. And so I'll save you by mentioning it.
He's right, you know.
How could I not love her? She's so politically incorrect, she calls me Cupcake. And also, Jack, I mean, you told him all the books I wrote. My best book, which is still in print, is an Italian-American cookbook that I wrote. And I'm the proudest of that of almost anything. Okay, let me say what I have to say. I'm going to start by talking about my father. I don't usually do this, but the time has come. My father was born in 1920. When the war broke out, he joined the Navy and went and fought in the Pacific. He was on a light cruiser called the Wichita. He came back alive and went to work. He worked unloading trucks at the Fulton Street Vegetable Market in Manhattan. Then he tried owning a bar in Brooklyn. When that failed, he's the only person I know who failed at owning a bar. I mean, that seems to me impossible. But when that failed, he became a day laborer, a hod carrier. He poured cement. He wasn't, from this you could get, he was an ordinary person, a very, very, very ordinary person. Not fancy at all. You might say he was more prosaic than poetic. But there was one poem that he loved. And he would say it to us kids every now and then. He must have learned it in 7th or 8th grade since he never went on to high school. It was an old poem by Sir Walter Scott. It goes like this. Breathes there the man with soul so dead who never to himself hath said, this is my own, my native land, whose heart hath ne'er within him burned, as home his footsteps he hath turned, from wandering on a foreign strand. If such there breathed, go, mark him well. For him no minstrel raptures swell. The wretch, consented all in self, shall quickly forfeit fair renown, and doubly dying shall go down to the vile dust from whence he sprung, unwept, unhonored, and unsung. Teach patriotism? You know, it seems, on the face of it, unnecessary. Patriotism seems like something simply natural. Only those with dead souls, if the poem can be believed, only those with dead souls don't love their country. In fact, we sometimes hear countries called our fatherland. Sometimes they might call it our motherland. We often love our country the way we love our own, as part of ourselves, because for some inbred natural reason, all humans love their own. We know that. For example, no matter how wonderful, how lovely other parents' children are, and no matter how disappointing your own children might be, it still takes an immense effort of the will to love other people's kids more than your own. The same seems to be true with love of country. If love of one's own is natural to being human, as love of ourself is, why would he ever think it even necessary to teach people to love their native land? Still, natural or not, I do believe patriotism can be undermined and twisted. And in America today, it is being twisted. I spent much of my adult life as a president of or professor in some very fine colleges and universities. And I am not one who is comfortable painting schools and colleges with so broad a brush as to say that they are each and all corrupting our kids and turning children against their country. But we all know that some, perhaps many, are. So the question we have to get to is, what can we do about it? But to know how to remedy the problem, we first have to ask what's causing so many teachers and their students to actively dislike the country. Now, from what I can see, this undermining is done in a few ways. Some milder, some worse than others. For example, these days we all have to be critical thinkers. This rarely means careful thinking or systematic thinking or analytic thinking or, heaven forbid, just plain thinking. To be critical often means exactly that, being critical. We have to criticize everyone and everything that went before. Now, our students are hardly critical of themselves, since so many of them are led to believe, perhaps even encouraged to believe, that their generation knows more and better about all the important things. All too often, critical thinking has taken the place once occupied by plain old thinking, or what we just used to call understanding. Second, in some schools and colleges, and our panel today covered much of this, students often only read those things that support their position or their identity. Things contrary to or ideas and books that might work to undermine their ideas and notions trigger unhappy feelings. And neither students nor their professors and teachers want to be made uncomfortable. So, do I think these institutions of great learning should teach patriotism? Can you imagine what a mess they would make of it? Why would you trust them? Third, you know the sad content of much contemporary history and civic education. Jack just touched on it. The American founders were racists, sexist, homophobic rich white guys. From that, it follows that the country they established must be the same: racist, sexist, unequal, unjust, and pretty much evil. But maybe the worst part of education today is not the misuse of the idea of critical thinking, perhaps not even the thought that all knowledge is progressive and we living today know better than those who lived before. Perhaps the worst is not even the propaganda that our fathers were evil, racist, old, and white. Perhaps the worst thing is summed up in the word I used a few seconds ago: identity. We are taught in schools, in popular culture, in movies, you name it, that the thing that defines us, the thing we should be most attached to and devoted to, is our identity. This thing that is most important to us seems always to be something narrow, not something grand. Perhaps it's our race, our sexual orientation or preference, our particular religion or sect, our color or ethnicity. Everything but our identification, our identity as simply Americans. Now, the few paragraphs I just spoke are true, but not completely true. I said I didn't want to paint with too broad a brush for one simple reason. There are a very good number, of schools and colleges that aren't, as I just said. Many of them are small and private, many religious, and some, I have to tell you, are major private and public university that have been touched by the work of the Jack Miller Center. Why some places have been able to resist these trends that I've just mentioned, I hope we can get to that in a bit. But Let's first ask a serious question. If being patriotic is natural for most human beings, if the poem is right that those who do not love their country have seriously dead souls, why is it that we have a problem? Have we always had this problem? Do all countries have this problem? Let me take us back to the time of the American founding, to the time when we declared our independence and then wrote our Constitution. We must have been one country then, no? Place full of patriotic men and women, people willing to sacrifice as the Declaration of Independence, their fortunes, their honor, even their lives. Well, maybe not. If you look back to those days, it looks like we weren't all that unified in our devotion to this new country of ours. Probably a third of the colonists were still loyal to Great Britain, a third were patriots and fought for us to be free, and roughly another third, from what I've heard, just tried to sit it out. Even the Declaration of Independence itself hints at this lack of devotion to the new country. It declares that we were united colonies, but it also notes that we were 13 free and independent states. So given that bifurcation, which should we say was our own, our native land, as Walter Scott says? The United States, or the individual state in which we might reside? This problem was the heart of so much of the turmoil in our early history. Think of poor Robert E. Lee. To which community did he owe his allegiance, his devotion? To the people of Virginia or the people of the United States? You probably know that in the years before the Civil War, we already understood we had this problem. The opponents of the Constitution, the Anti-Federalists as they came to be called, said that there had never been a republic or a democracy in all of human history that was big and diverse. Only little countries could be real democracies, countries more like cities than whole nations. And if they were larger, they had to be unified and homogeneous. They had to have an identity that each and every citizen could identify with. Perhaps all Catholic, or all Jews, or all Spaniards, or all Japanese. And even then, there were fractures and factions that could easily split the country into civil war. But our founders knew we couldn't be unified in terms of, let's say, religion or ethnicity. That couldn't be our identity, one religion, one ethnicity. In the original 13 states, there were Anglicans, Lutherans, Congregationalists, Baptists, Catholics. We were English and Scottish and German and Scandinavian and Dutch. We were split among farmers and merchants and those who worked the seas and the rivers. We were from the very beginning as diverse and pluralistic as the political mind could imagine. We couldn't be unified by blood. We couldn't, as other places might, give our devotion to one sect or one extended family or one tribe or one common way of life. If patriotism is built on love of one's own, what exactly is our own? What do we as diverse Americans have in common, hold in common, that could claim our loyalty and to which we might be devoted? In other words, what is our singular American identity? From the Declaration of Independence to the Federalist Papers to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, what our fathers hoped we would grow in devotion to, what we would make our own, was something hardly tangible. It was the idea of the equality of all men in the possession of equal rights and equal liberty. It would be this devotion to an idea that would lead us to attach ourselves to this country. It would be a country that, with great difficulty and with many missteps and failures, would protect our rights and provide us with equal justice under law. It would be that country and those principles which would hold us together and even help us respect, perhaps even love, our neighbors, our fellow Americans, with whom we share no common bond, no blood, no creed. It was devotion to the country built on the idea of equality, rights, and freedom that led my father, an Italian-American who quoted Scottish poets, to fight in a war with Jews and Irishmen, Hispanics from New Mexico, who died by the hundreds, by the way, fighting for America in the Bataan Death March, plus everyone else from West Virginia mountain men to Navajo code talkers. They understood something about the promise of America which, even if it wasn't perfect or perfectly applied, commanded their love and devotion and transcended their different backgrounds, and I dare say transcended their different identities. I want to read something that has always moved me. It's a talk Abraham Lincoln gave here in Chicago just after the 4th of July in 1858. It goes like this. We are now a mighty nation. We are 30 or about 30 million people, and we own and inhabit about 1/15th part of the dry land of the whole earth. We run our memory back over the pages of history for about 82 years. There we discover that we were then a very small people, vastly inferior to what we are today, with a considerably smaller extent of territory, and indeed less of everything we deem desirable among men. We look upon these changes as exceedingly advantageous to us, and we fix upon something that happened a way back, as in some way or other being connected with this rise of our prosperity. We find the race of men living in that day whom we claim as our fathers and grandfathers. They were iron men, men who fought and died for the principles they were contending for. And we understood, because of what they did, that the degree of prosperity that we now enjoy has come to us. We hold these annual Independence Day celebrations to remind ourselves of all the good that was done in this process of time, of how it was done and who did it, and how we are historically connected to it. We go from these meetings feeling more attached to one another and more firmly bound to the country we inhabit. In every way, we are better for these celebrations. But after we have done all this, we have not yet reached the whole. There is something else connected with it. We have, besides these men descended by blood from our ancestors, among us perhaps half our people who are not descendants at all of these men. They are men who have come from Europe, German, Irish, French, and Scandinavian, men who have come from Europe themselves or whose ancestors have come hither and settled here, finding themselves our equal in all things. If they look back through the history to trace their connection with those days by blood, they find they have none. They cannot carry themselves back into that glorious epoch and make themselves feel that they are part of us. But when they look through that old Declaration of Independence, they find that those old men say, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And then they feel that moral sentiment taught in that day evidenced their relation to those men, that it is the father of all moral principle in them, and that they have a right to claim it as though they were blood of the blood and flesh of the flesh of the men who wrote that declaration, and so they are. That is the electric cord in that declaration that links the hearts of patriotic and liberty-loving men together, that will link those patriotic hearts as long as the love of freedom exists in the mind of men throughout the world. So how should we, back to me now, how should we go about teaching patriotism in our schools? I believe the way to counter those who feel called to demean the achievements of this country and undermine the natural affection we should all feel for it is not by moralizing demands or preachy lectures, but by the clarity and strength of our understanding. I firmly believe that understanding buttresses affection, that even if patriotism is natural, it still is surely refined and reinforced by understanding, that trying to encourage patriotism not grounded in knowledge will be shallow and maybe worse. But if we wish to inculcate this kind of intelligent patriotism, if we wish students and our fellow citizens to respect this country and what it stands for, where do we turn? We could start, of course, by educating parents. Most of them know in their hearts that the founding principles of this nation are just, are rare, and are worthy of transmission from one generation to the next. Many parents I know are desperate to find articles and books to help them understand what they love. Here I want to commend the Jack Miller Center, professors connected to the Jack Miller Center, period. Professors connected to the Jack Miller Center work hard at publishing good books, articles, and op-eds accessible to regular citizens, writings that help everyone understand better the meaning of America. In fact, we were just talking at our table, one of our professors on the Miller board, Bill McClay, just published a book this year, perhaps the best and certainly the best-selling book in American history in, honestly, decades. It's called Land of Hope, An Invitation to the Great American Story. It's for parents, it's for school teachers, and it's for universities. There are others involved in this project, literally hundreds of teachers and university professors who work in their classes to transmit our founding and constitutional principles. It has been the hope of all of us that rediscovering the meaning of the founding principles and the reasons behind those principles might help set us back right. This means finding those extraordinary professors and teachers who are not afraid to be old-fashioned and teach their students about the American founding, not afraid to help students understand what the founders were trying to accomplish and why, not deterred from understanding what they did, respect what they did, and then transmitting all that they did to their students. Tearing down is easy. The tendency to promote our own, more contemporary notions while rejecting even belittling ideas that went before helps us view ourselves as truly critical thinkers and makes us feel better about ourselves. But maybe, just maybe, if we can help teachers take the founding seriously and try to understand what today seems so easy to dismiss, we might all learn something truly valuable, not only for ourselves, but also for our students and our country. Want to teach kids to love their country? Have them understand all that America has accomplished in this chaotic and tearful world, and the reasons, the ideas, the principles behind those amazing accomplishments. In other words, teach them the fullness of what the American founding achieved and the reasons and ideas that allowed those accomplishments to unfold. Thank you. Now, I know we have time for questions, but I have lost my glasses, so Mike, I cannot see you people, by the way. You're a blur. You're a blur. You have to point them out and call on them by name.
You said, is this working? Yeah. Mm-hmm. You said teaching patriotism not based on understanding.
Wait, try that louder and again.
You said that teaching patriotism or inculcating patriotism not based in understanding would be shallow or perhaps even worse. I was wondering what you meant by perhaps even worse. Shallow seems clear enough.
Okay, I don't know, it sounded good when I wrote it. Never overlook the obvious, Tom, you know, come on. All my fellow Miller Center people find that hysterical, you know. If you don't know the real reasons why they did things, if you do pretend reasons like Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence not to protect all men or all people, he wrote it to protect the rights of Englishmen, and therefore everybody else is out. You're going to not only be wrong, but you're going to say something that really has dastardly consequences. If you say that Jefferson was a slaveholder and therefore a hypocrite when he said all men were created equal, you're actually there not saying something wrong. because he did say all men are created equal, and he did own slaves. She said, but that means he's a hypocrite. And I say, you know, he probably would agree with you that he was being a hypocrite. But he didn't know how to get out of being a hypocrite, but he did know when he wrote the Declaration of Independence that all men were created equal, and he did know that what he wrote condemned himself. Kids have to see that. If they think, oh, we can go from he didn't really mean it, or he's a hypocrite and end the story there, it has dastardly consequences. That's all I really meant by it. Come on, there's a bunch of interesting questions. Do I have to question myself? What's going on here?
Sir, right behind you. Thank you. I would only point out with respect to hypocrisy that La Rochefoucauld said that hypocrisy is the tribute that vice pays to virtue. And so a hypocrite knows in some respect that he is wrong and is therefore better than an obdurate and unrepentant sinner.
No, I think that's, I know people think that's sometimes facile, but it's not. It's absolutely true. Evil people know that they're doing wrong and love it, or are too stupid to know that they're doing wrong and they relish it. Really intelligent people know if they're doing something wrong, that they have to admit to themselves, I have to do this, or I'm forced to do it, or I don't know what else to do, or I'm really stuck. Well, the founders, for example, in writing the Constitution, moving away from Jefferson, were stuck. Easily, of the 12 states that were in the Constitutional Convention, easily 10 of them would have loved to have abolished slavery. But they knew they couldn't. There was just no way. They couldn't, so they have a choice. Do we have a union, or do we not have a union? How does it help the slaves if it's a union just of freed people and doesn't include states where slaves live? Does that help them? Do they get freed sooner if they're not part of this union? They say we're stuck, and of course they made a deal. I might say a deal with the devil, but I wouldn't. We want to be unified. We want a constitution that will bring peace to this country and not inflame things. You know, peace is an important thing. We will accomplish nothing by abolishing slavery in this document. And besides, and I think they all thought this, I think to a man they all thought this, slavery was on the course of ultimate extinction. Slavery was an unprofitable way of life. And in the hearts of even the worst slave owners knew that they were doing something wrong. And besides it wasn't until the invention of the cotton gin that slavery became really profitable. And so by then the die had been cast. So we're talking about, let me put it this way. There's a terrible tendency among the intelligentsia to blame all bad things on the politics, on society, on cultural customs, and never blame it on human nature. Never blame it on human nature, Goldie. Yeah. That these were men with great ideas who were willing to fight and die for these ideas, and even if they couldn't achieve them completely, did the best they could and gave them to us. Or as Lincoln said, gave them not only to us, gave these to the whole world, that even people from Scandinavia, Scotland, in my case Italy, can say, this is now my native land. Why would you dismiss that? And if they did something wrong, it wasn't the fault of their ideas. It wasn't the fault of their being Americans. It was the fault of the fact that human beings have how does Hamilton put it in the Federalist Papers? Rapacious, avaricious, and cruel, I think were the words. He says, now we're stuck with having to form a country, a just and fine and progressive country with bad material. He says, you know what, we're going to do our best and try. And I think he succeeded. But don't let people get away with blaming, oh, you're a louse because you're an American. No, I'm a louse because I'm human.
Thanks for your talk. You mentioned that understanding deepens affection. It makes sense to me when affection is present before understanding, but is there a possibility that understanding without affection takes a wrong turn?
Absolutely. Can I turn the question around? The whole panel today, and this talk I gave as well, sort of rests upon the idea of the importance of understanding to refine our views and make us, in fact, when we understand it, perhaps to love it more. But I began by saying, and I think we all know this, patriotism is a sentiment. Patriotism is a desire. Patriotism exists in the heart even more than it exists in the head. Who are the greatest patriots of the last 20 years? I propose that the firemen who ran up the World Trade Center to save people they had never met, white and black, and, brown and yellow, they had never seen, never would see, didn't know their names, but they ran up to save them and they died. Were all of them college graduates? Probably no. They went up because somehow the country itself taught patriotism, not just schools, not just universities. I still hold to the belief, and I think the panel today was clear about this, hold to the belief that understanding will refine and strengthen and buttress. Madison says at one point that we have to have liberty and learning leaning against each other. One has to hold the other up. But we shouldn't overlook the fact that patriotism is a matter of the heart. And I would love for us somehow to find out how in the Miller Center we can teach love, because that's what we're talking about. There was a time when books would come out that would be compilations of patriotic songs that you could teach kids, good poems about how wonderful America is. Liz was talking today about, in the panel, about how Lincoln talked at first about the emotion of patriotism, and then after that, he talked about we need reason, we need understanding. That's what I think Lincoln understood, that both of them feed on each other, both of them need each other, and that understanding without devotion is shallow, and devotion without understanding is weak. This is why, and some of you get me off on this, this is why you read Abraham Lincoln. That was a nice talk I read from Abraham Lincoln. It was, in a sense, a more poetic talk than a prosaic talk. And when you read the Gettysburg Address, it's a poem. It's a 14-line poem. And it's a poem that follows the images and the cadences of the Anglican liturgy. It talks about our fathers brought forth, like Jesus was brought forth, and laid in the manger, dedicated, baptized to an idea. His mother was liberty. He was formed in liberty, conceived in liberty. And you go through all of the stuff he did, and you realize he understood that prose is not enough, that this is a rather prosaic country. We're devoted to making and selling and buying, and he also wanted to elevate that and make it somehow finer. The second inaugural, the same way. That is as much as, if not more, a poem even than the Gettysburg Address. And so I don't know how to make this anything more than what I've just said. But I do know that my father wasn't educated, but he was, when the war came, he enlisted. No way he wouldn't. And he didn't do it on the basis of knowledge, although he knew he liked what he saw in this country. But he did it because it was, his heart told him to do it. Okay. Want to do more?
My question is about victimization.
About what?
It's the culture of victimization.
Got it.
Now, there's a lot of currency in that. You can go far with it. Get you fame, fortune, and you can gather evidence to find that some group is discriminated against you, and you're a victim, and you're not as equal as somebody else because you can build that. Now, can you be patriotic and still be a victim?
Can you be what?
Can you be in a state of patriotism and still be a victim? Seems to me it's an either-or choice.
I know people who are victimized by all kinds of things. The problem is when back when, if somebody you went and bought something from or tried to buy something from said, "I'm sorry, I don't sell to your kind," you were hurt. You were, in a sense, victimized. Or you could even say, "I'm going to hire you, but I'm not paying you because you're Irish or because you're black as much as I'm paying my family members over here." You were victimized. Does that mean you hate the country? We had a way in this country, and I'm not denying victimization, we had a way in this country of having victimization be almost always on the private level. But once we have big government, and once we say government is the cause of all our blessings and the cure for all our ills, then when you're victimized, you blame the country. And then it's hard to be patriotic. That's very general, and we probably could fill it in with examples here and there. But that's sort of been going through my head lately, that the growth of big government has made all our petty differences world historical differences. Now, if, never mind, you know what I'm talking about. Why are you standing up?
Thank you, first of all, for a fantastic talk.
You're welcome.
Please join me in thanking John Agresto. So once again, please join me in thanking our great panel today, and a great talk from John. And thank you to Jack and Goldie Miller for making all the work of the Jack Miller Center and our partner faculty across the country possible. So thank you all. And thank you all for coming out tonight. I know how busy you are. Please don't hesitate to get in touch with the staff at the Jack Miller Center. We're happy to do whatever we can to let you know more about the work that we've been doing for the last 15 years. And please don't forget to take your care package home with you. Thank you again.